and we are dealing with item 8 on the agenda. And we have the speakers as this morning. I think Dr. Neil, Jenny Bryan, Martin Lucas Smith, John Franks, Emma Kerr. In favour of the application we have Julian Curry and his team. We also have speakers from Councillor Robertson and Councillor Walsh. This item will be introduced by the case officer, Toby Williams, assisted by Mairead O'Sullivan. Toby Williams.
Thanks, Chair. This application seeks a D1 general education use sought by the applicants. Officers' views the primary issue for members is whether the proposal is acceptable subject to an appropriate community access agreement being secured through a Section 106 agreement to comply with Policy 511. Members are reminded that commercial decisions that have been taken regarding the intended occupier of the building are not material to the determination of this planning application, and neither is land ownership. In terms of existing community access, there is none. The 1997 application, which is referred to as the operative consent, provides for community use, but its aspirations for this do not appear to have been realised. The fact that the permission for the 2014 application does not secure community access is a strong fallback position for the applicants. Some of the most recent third-party representations question whether it is reasonable to reach a recommendation on the application at this stage when the draft agreement for community access is not finalised. However, it is common for committee to delegate the detail of Section 106 agreements to officers. In this case, the first draft of the agreement has been subject to public consultation, and officers have commented on a further revised version. The applicants have provided an overview of the current negotiations on it in a letter which is summarised on the amendment sheet. They indicate that they are agreeable to the vast majority of the suggestions made. If members wish for the Community Access Agreement to come back to Planning Committee for approval, they should clearly indicate this. Also on the amendment sheet is reference to additional third-party representations received, summary of a letter from CSVPA regarding their intended use of the building, summary of a letter that has been sent to members and residents, and an update response from the County Council. Chair, officers have read all of the third-party representations since the report was published, including those received yesterday. Taking these into account and the additional information provided by the applicants, the officer recommendation to approve remains and is only subject to 2 minor verbal changes to proposed conditions. Chair, if I could just ask members just quickly to turn to page 183 of the report. These are fairly simple amendments that are being proposed. The first amendment relates to condition 8, and that is to insert the words "at all times" after the word "public", and that change is a change which accords with the equivalent 1997 application permission. The second change is to condition 10, also found on page 183, and it is to remove the wording condition 8 and replace it with condition 11 of 14/1252 full. I apologise for this error. This change has arisen because condition 11 of that original 14/1252 has been discharged since this part of the report was written. Now, Chair, the last point which arises out of the decision on the last application is that the physical elements of this scheme that is before you, including the plant, is the same as the physical elements, including the plant, that have been deferred under the Section 73 application. So it would be illogical if at the end of this debate committee were to not defer this application in order to resolve the issue of plant. But having discussed this issue with council solicitor and Sarah and officers, it remains the case that the application does need to be considered on its own merits. There may well be other issues that arise out of this application of itself that may render it unacceptable to committee members. So I do think that we need to discuss it in full, but members will have to be mindful of the deferral on the last application in respect of the issue of plant. Is that clear? Mairead can just quickly run through the slides.
Thank you. So as Toby said, the physical changes are the same as those proposed in the Section 73 application, so the roof plan, etc. is the same. The only element that I wish to point out are the community access spaces, which are studios 4 and 5 here, and 8 and 9 on the upper floor. 4 and 5 are a large studio with a movable wall running through the centre, and 8 and 9 are 2 smaller studios on the mezzanine floor.
Right, we should now turn to the objectors, and you have there are several of you. There are 5 people apparently. But you have 6 minutes between you, so how you divide up that time is absolutely... Sorry?
Sorry, can I just interrupt for a moment?
Yeah.
This objector who's in the room now, she wasn't really called out. Her name was Miss Kerr. She hasn't come to the table.
Miss Kerr, where are you? Miss Kerr is not coming to the table.
I'm Kelly Braden, and I'm not in the reception.
And somebody else is not coming to the table, so the number is going down all the time. All right, we'll manage with the objectors who remain.
Our charity pact was founded after the loss of this site as a community building. This is a huge local issue. The S106 Community Access Agreement is the core of this particular application in addressing the city's local plan, section 511, and trying to regain
I'm
some...
just sorry to interrupt you. The fact that you're reading your statement and reading it very, very quickly is making it quite difficult for me to hear and understand what you're saying. Will you please take it slowly?
Can you restart?
We restart.
And you can restart, and we'll restart the time.
Our charity, PACT, the Petersfield Area Community Trust, was founded after the loss of this site as a community building. This is a huge local issue. The S106 Community Access Agreement is the core of this application as we see it, in addressing the city's local plan, section 511, and trying to regain some local community support. No one is happy with the situation we find ourselves in, but we feel that this application could be an improvement and has some valuable protections in its proposed conditions. However, the S106 drafts we've seen so far have been kept private. The revisions we've been told about seem to be full of weasel words and seem to leave wide scope for discouraging community use in practice. It's very easy for community use to get discouraged. You have to plan a term ahead. It's not a good situation. The costs even could potentially include paying staff of CSBPA to open the building. We don't know. It's all unspecified. The intended occupier itself, CSBPA, have been very notably positive in discussion with our trustees, and we would like to work with them to see a rewritten agreement which has their positive spirit and in which the local community can put some trust. But as we see it, the current draft means the application is simply not ready to be decided.
Martin Lucas Smith, I'm a local resident. For 30 years, this site, built as a youth club, has been the subject of local concern for proper community access, still required by the 1997 permission. The question before you is simple. Does this application comply with Policy 511 on protecting community facilities by providing a proper and robust Community Access Agreement, CAA. Officers make this clear in the report. The CAA is a fundamental matter, it's not a minor condition. But you're being asked to judge a CAA that does not exist. It is not in front of you, because it does not exist, even though, as officers say, it is the fundamental matter. It is unsafe for you to decide either way because of this. The long, troubled history of this site shows that you really must approve proper, finalised documents yourself, and we've just had 2 hours really demonstrating why that's needed. In 10 years of looking at planning applications of all kinds and speaking to you sometimes, I've never seen such a catalogue of errors and a developer acting in such bad faith. The council forgot to restrict the 2014 dance school application to dance uses, a language school anyone? And they forgot a community access plan. The developer, for their part, has presented 6 revisions to a travel plan, listed with errors, done work on site for conditions approved, etc., etc. On the CAA, in July, 4 months ago, officers told the developer that the CAA needed changes, giving guidance on improvements to help them. In October, they reiterated that the problems still remain. Now, at the 11th hour, the developer, having had 4 months to resolve these problems, says at this 11th hour that the applicant says that they can be trusted to finalise it. We believe that major problems still remain. It also needs full community consultation. Please do not approve this application in principle with the CAA to be decided later, e.g. under delegated powers or at your next meeting. It's not safe for you to approve the whole principle. Instead, please discuss it now and then officially pause, as you've in fact just done with the previous application, to require that a finalised CAA be presented to you at the next meeting. Toby told me yesterday that this would be a valid course of action to have such a pause. Pausing would also enable problems with the various conditions to be fixed.
Just to confirm, you did give that advice, I believe.
Chair, just to confirm, I did. That is an option that is open to members, yes.
Thank you.
I trust the clock stopped.
The clock has stopped and you have now several seconds left.
Right. It's been shown with section with the 2014 approval consent that there were a lot of very, very serious problems with the conditions. So I agree with the previous objector, the conditions must all be straightened out. And in my view, as a local resident, there are 3 important conditions that are entirely missing that must be added. Now, like in the 1997 report, there were 2 conditions protecting public open space. There's only 1 in the report in front of you. You need to add back the one that was equivalent to condition 16 to do with the maintenance of the public open space. Second, and this may not be necessary if the tree preservation orders cover it, but in the 1997 approval, there were 2 conditions, number 3 and number 9, that protected the trees and plants. I'd like officers to confirm that there are no holes been left. Thirdly, the car park management plan, which Toby approved under delegated powers for the 14 application, he did that on the 4th of November. Since then, Emily Butler on the 16th of November has sent in further comments that she said needed to be incorporated into the car management plan. Therefore, a separate condition for a separate car management plan is required for this report, and that needs to be conditioned and consulted on. Right. In addition to that, and I'm pleased that 2 of the 5 conditions that I said were flawed, there are additional flaws in conditions 4, 7, and 9, which I've sent in full detail in my report 19 to officers. And if you do agree to defer this report, you've got plenty of time to think about them. Condition 4 relates to advice from the acoustic expert that there be an officer present during the setup of noise limiting devices, obviously of key local importance. Condition 7 is to do with the one which has been discussed between the applicant and the officer about restricting it to a designated language school. I've raised a number of concerns. And condition 9, I've forgotten to jot down what it was about, but it's there. Thank you very much.
By Julia Curry.
Chair, thank you once again. On this particular occasion, I personally have to confess to a sense of responsibility given my own pivotal role in what, above all else, has been my long-held ambition to breathe new life into what I believe to this day could be the most exciting performing arts-led regeneration of a unique city centre community facility in a generation. Charles Robinson took up the challenge of finding Bodywork Company Dance Studio a new home in mid-2014 to relocate the school primarily from its central campus on Glisson Road. I myself approached the owner of the Howard Mallet Centre on behalf of Bodywork and asked whether they might lease the space within any redevelopment proposals. Quite unexpectedly, Chard Robinson were offered the building for sale, at which point Stephen Chard and Neil Robinson themselves decided to pursue the overall regeneration of this much-loved facility. We would like to clarify for the record that throughout the progression from Bodywork as the preferred occupier of this facility to CSVPA, community access to the facility has always been a cornerstone of our approach to this regeneration project. With regards to the 106 itself, we do believe that the negotiation of a legally binding bilateral agreement between two parties should not be negotiated by myriad stakeholders at the same time. There are two people's signatures on that agreement, and we believe that's the way it should continue with officers from the City Council. We can confirm everything that Toby has already confirmed, however, that we have basically conceded to most of the requests made of us. As you know, our preferred tenant, CSVPA, had planned to be in for the start of this academic year, but has had to take alternative temporary space at significant unforeseen additional cost to it. We have looked extensively before for alternative tenants for the building as a dance and performing arts centre, but there are currently no other viable tenants who could deliver anywhere near the quality of community access currently under agreement with the officers through the 106. Without CSVPA, the building will lie vacant once more, probably for years to come, and the community will once again be deprived of the opportunity to use this space. Thank you for your time, and I will now hand you over to Elizabeth from CSVPA.
Mr. Chair, this application, if approved, would facilitate the availability of very high-quality dance and performing arts studios and teaching space for the benefit of CSVPA students and members of the local community alike. This is space that both we and the community desperately need. We have been looking for new premises for our performing arts courses since early 2015, and our discussions with local community dance groups confirm that they are also in need of access to such space. The premises currently have planning permission for a dance school and studio, and it is thanks to this planning permission that we now have a fantastic new facility boasting modern, high-quality dance flooring and facilities. However, the description of the authorized use as a dance school in the existing planning permission is too restrictive in the context of some elements of our performing arts courses, and without change would require us to run those elements elsewhere. We hope that through an approval of this application for wider educational usage at City Life House, we can expand our dance activities at the property to cover our broader group of performing arts courses, including music. This would be a great benefit to both our students and the local community alike, as it would also open premises up for more use by a much broader range of community groups. As you may know, a very significant financial investment has been made by the owners to transform this building into a stunning, well-equipped new space, located in the heart of the community, just meters away from our students' accommodation building, Varsity House. It would ensure that they can walk to class rather than often taking taxis, as they currently have to at our temporary space, and would offer other residents in the Petersfield ward an impressive facility on their doorstep. It is a great space, and we hope that we will make a great partner for those who wish to use it alongside us. Unlike most other dance and performing arts businesses, our main hours of operation are only 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday to Friday, leaving the space available for use by community groups outside of these hours. Our head of school, Chris Mon, has already engaged in discussions to line up a number of community groups who would love to use the space during the available times and are ready to do so. There are many more we would engage with once we are able to occupy the building. We have also been in detailed discussions with the council to agree a formal community access scheme, which would make the building available to community groups at cost price. In addition, some of our staff members would love to be able to offer fitness classes, yoga classes, weekend performing club for children, and ballet classes to members of the community outside of school hours, all of which this application would facilitate. We don't believe that there is currently anyone else in the Cambridge vicinity other than CSVPA who has the resources to make this a financially viable dance or performing arts space, let alone make such a high quality facility available to the community at such a low price. If the applications before you today are not approved, I fear that this stunning new facility will simply sit empty and unused once again. This would be desperately sad for all the students who would otherwise use it right away. The facility is there waiting to be used, and I do hope the committee will now allow us to bring this previously derelict site back into use for the benefit of our students, our business, and our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all very much for your contributions. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you. I think the community has made clear that there's a long history of concern in the local locality for the use and future of this building. The Pact itself was founded because of the loss of community facility in the past. I think the other major thing you need to be recognised is that the community have taken action in the courts. In 2006, an application was put forward to knock down the building and construct a community innovation centre. That the local community found very concerning, and mainly because of the poor design would have meant a change to industrial use of the building. It must be remembered it stands next to and is part of one of the very few areas of open space in the area. So that application in 2006 was granted by the City Council, but the community was so incensed they took the matter to the High Court, where it was overturned. The importance of the building as a facility for the community is clear from this action in 2006 and has been restated this year, as is shown from the large number of objections listed in the report. In their report, the officers have clearly shown that if this application succeeds, there is a grave risk that the building will be lost as a community facility in contravention of Local Plan Policy 511. Now, that policy requires that an existing community facility must be retained or replaced at least at its existing level and quality. And the response from the community clearly demonstrates that the need for their facility to remain available is still there. In the area there are very few other community facilities, and the need for one is demonstrated very well by the recent attempt by the local community charity Pact to buy the Sturton Street Methodist Chapel and Hall, which before it closed had been quite heavily used by the community, especially for dance classes for children and young people. The applicant and the CSVPA people have made clear that they think they would make good use of the building, but this is an application for use by anybody in this class. You cannot assume that CSVPA is going to be in there. You cannot assume that, and you know that that's very important to this whole issue. The Community Access Agreement is the major stumbling point in my view. This is an important document to safeguard the building as a facility for use by the community, and the applicants say they're prepared to agree this. It's a form of legal agreement and it would form part of the Section 106 agreement. Unfortunately, the applicant's first draft was so badly drawn up and indicated that either they had no understanding of what is required or they had no intention of it being an agreement which would provide genuine access. In July, the officers set down a list of requirements for revisions. No response. Until September, where the Child Robinson applicants came back with changes being not accepted and asked the council to redraft the agreement themselves. On the 2nd of November, as ward councillor, I asked that the whole Section 106 agreement should go to the planning committee because the applicant appeared to be intent on producing something not appropriate for the purposes of use by the community. And here we are 4 weeks later with some table proposals received only in the last few days and having to be made available on the amendments sheet. The community, with their long and sustained concern for continued access to the Howard Mallet, have not had a chance to consider and comment on those proposals. It seems clear that the proposals show that the applicant does not intend to provide the sort of access expected by the community. For instance, in the additional papers, it's suggested that the building would be available for the community in the evenings and weekends for a total of 36 hours each week. Yet they also say that they would only guarantee access for 40 hours per month. There's a vast difference, and it does demonstrate they really do not intend to give proper access to the community. According to I believe the whole application cannot be accepted as it is. I suggested it be deferred and only brought back to this committee when the Community Access Agreement has been rewritten and discussed with the community to safeguard the genuine access in compliance with Policy 511. Thank you.
And might I begin by congratulating you on your elevation to my first attendance at this planning committee under your chairship, and it's like being in the court of Louis XV. I would argue also that we should go for a deferral, if not a rejection, on the grounds of policies 4.2 and 511. I will try to avoid repeating the points that have been made by the members of the public who have spoken and my colleague Councillor Robertson, but I speak as the County Councillor for Petersfield Ward. I'll begin with 4.2. The officers did not show this in their introduction, but the papers quite clearly state that without telling, or without the approval rather, of the public authority, a diagonal path has been asserted alongside the curtilage of the building and across the protected open space. One's forced to ask why the path was not kept flush and what the purpose of the path is. The claim from the applicant is that, as we heard in the previous application, it's to support the parking layout, disabled access and the bin store. But nevertheless, this authority did not give approval to the insertion of that diagonal path across protected open space. And that stands in clear contravention of condition 15 of C1971020, which states that that space should be accessible, and that has not been by the insertion of hoardings and the new path, which clearly acts as a restriction on that public open space. This might well be more serious than a condition, but I highly suggest that the committee might wish to consider that particular aspect of it. The second part is 511, and I thought Mr. Franks didn't do himself a fair justice in representing just how strong community support is in the Northern Petersfield community for community access to the site. Well over £500,000 was raised in the campaign to save community access to the Sturton Street Methodist Church when it was sold, and literally hundreds of people have responded over the course of the past couple of years to this issue. There is a huge appetite for maintaining community access in an area which, as the council's own community services department shows, has the worst community provision in the entire city per head. As it's been said, we've not even seen the community access agreement. Now, I think it's also regrettable that the behaviour of the spokesperson for the applicant this morning has been frankly bullish and arrogant, and more respect ought to be shown towards elected representatives in a public authority. And that, it's sad to say, is representative of the behaviour of the applicant throughout this process. That contrasts very unfavourably with the excellent good faith that's being shown by Mr. Franks, Dr. Neil and others in leading the community on this issue. Bodywork, which has not yet been mentioned, has not been given access to the building yet. But many operational works, many of which have been retrospective, have gone on there at the same time. This does not lend itself towards seeing the applicant with good faith, and lends itself to a great deal of scepticism over what their plans are now. CSVPA is linked to the Cambridge Educational Group, which it can reasonably argue provides university teaching accommodation, and to CATS, a tutorial language college, both of which are excluded under 511. And since it's under general educational use, it's perfectly possible that Anglia Ruskin University could also gain access to the site. I'm sure none of this has anything at all to do with the insertion of paths, as seen in the previous application. Nevertheless, the community provision is smaller than before, of a worse quality, and as the officers concede in the report, at a potentially prohibitive cost. The committee ought to consider that we've had a series of already retrospective applications this morning alone, and that's not the only point that this has happened throughout the entire process. And it's not clear what the objectives of the applicant are, even at this stage. It seems to me that we have a very serious problem of mission creep, and it's the responsibility of public authority and elected representatives not to allow that to continue. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
For this application, but I think it'd be remiss not to make a few more comments on top of that. various speakers have referred to the community access agreement. Clearly, that is a very integral and essential element to get right. In terms of where we are, there has been an iteration or several iterations, but they were obviously asked to refine, retune, improve, whatever the right word is, the agreements before coming to this committee. But unfortunately, we haven't seen the latest iteration, which gives us confidence and satisfaction that the elements that we're concerned about as a planning authority have been addressed and are clearly going to be part of it. One of the points that I certainly spotted in one of the iterations that I sort of read was, I think, a fundamental understanding or misunderstanding of what, perhaps I'm wrong, but of what a community access agreement is about. It should be about guaranteeing a number of hours per week for the community. It is not about saying who we prefer as a group to use our building and at what price they will pay to use our building. It is fundamentally about the number of hours that are set by this planning authority to guarantee community access to a building which clearly in the past has had full community access and more recently part community access, and that's clearly I think a fundamental point to be addressed. The reason I say that is because my view is, and I think it's already been alluded to by Councillor Robertson, that actually a deferral which I will request on this application, partly because of the previous discussion and the points that were deferred on that basis, but also on the basis that we have a, in my opinion, some good intentions expressed by the applicants in their recent letter about the community access agreement, but this is so fundamental, I think, to us as the planning authority to do with this building, and also it's clearly paramount importance to the local residents who've taken the efforts to take views and correspondence on this matter, and not to have it, I think, formally before us, and hopefully with a formal period of consultation, so that those interested already who've commented can continue to comment until it's got right. I think is remiss of us to, if we don't allow that. So I think on that basis, that is another reason why this should be deferred, because we want to see actually in black and white what this actual agreement is going to say and what it's going to guarantee for community use and community access. If I'm right in thinking, this may be Miss Butler, no, it is Miss Butler, I need to ask a relevant question to you, if I may, Chair, on the back of that, because I remember reading that one of your points, and I thought a very valid point, was that you, from the travel plan transport statement perspective, were not really in the best position to comment until you knew what the community access agreement actually said, because clearly who was using the building is paramount for then how you assess the travel implications. Would that be fair?
I don't actually remember making that comment specifically. Obviously, the applicant has assessed use of the building for community uses as part of their assessment, which we're happy with. We consider it is robust. So obviously we have to consider this as general D1. So they have provided instances of evening use and weekend use, which we consider to be reasonable. So they have answered that question.
Councillor Wink.
I was trying to put you on the spot, but I know it's quite important to another, obviously, part of the community access agreement, but clearly if you had a fuller knowledge of what the community use was, you could give a more accurate sort of travel plan statement perspective. Would that be fair?
Of course that would be helpful, but obviously the travel plan itself would be signed off prior to occupation of the development, at which point we hopefully would know who the occupier is, and in order to mitigate their use of the car as such. So as far as I'm concerned, yes, it would give an overall idea of how it would be operated, but for a general D1 use, generally, and for bodywork itself, when it was the previous application, when we looked at a dance school, they had to provide
examples of what community use would be. Obviously, we don't know the end user will be CSVPA, so they've had to make an assumption on that use, which we consider to be robust.
I think.
And my final point, Chair, depends, because obviously members may not wish to defer it, but it would be illogical if we didn't. There is a question about, well, not a question, but I think it's a point to be raised about, the application talks about a D1 educational use, change of use, which is fine, but I think it's important to know what actually is included within the educational use in that regard and what isn't. And if you do read the existing local plan on which we still base our decisions, university teaching accommodation, language schools and tutorial colleges are excluded from that category. So it depends on who the applicant, who a prospective tenant could be. There will be a question possibly for the council to answer at some point in the future.
It sounds to me as if the drift of opinion among members is that this, for technical reasons, but for other good reasons, needs to be deferred. Councillor Smart.
I'll be brief. So, I think with the benefit of hindsight, I believe that the county should never have built this building in the first place. on public open space. And although I've used the building myself over 20 years ago as they wanted it, it was a bad building then, and it's still a bad building now, both internally and externally. It's an ugly building and functions badly. However, we are what we are, as they say, and so I would say that we need the community access agreement in order to go forward, and so we have to defer. And so, as was said, we are debating this application on its merits at the moment. So I would just like to point out one small factor, which is that I know it's an internal factor, but anyway, it's been said that Studio 8 and Studio 9 are going to be public access, accessible to the public, but Studio 8 isn't accessible because it's up some steps, I believe.
Not disability accessible.
Chair, through you, I'll come back and answer that question directly, and then I've got some other more general points regarding community access agreements. On that point, there is a lift that would allow someone in a wheelchair access up to that level, and Lorraine may well be able to point that out on the plan, but it is all those spaces there, that's the lift, and that's been installed within the building. I've seen it myself. It provides access for someone in a wheelchair to go to that upper level. On the issue of the community access agreements, I fully understand the concerns that members of the public and councillors have raised in relation to not seeing an up-to-date draft of it. To a very real extent, officers have been pushing for that further draft to be made public, but the developers have been unwilling to make that accession. So myself and Mairead, in combination with solicitor input and colleagues in community services, have provided further feedback on a revised draft that members of the public have not seen, and those changes that were being proposed are effectively represented in the planning agent's letter of the 24th of November, which sets out in quite detailed terms what they are amenable to in terms of agreement, in terms of hours of use, deposit, insurance, all of those matters, which includes a specification for the spaces that the community could use to be available for a minimum amount of time. They have suggested that minimum amount of time would be 40 hours per month. That is the suggestion in that document. My preference would have been for that community access agreement to be in a more advanced state so that we could have shared it more publicly. That is not the case. However, I must try and give members an understanding of really how tenuous this position is in relation to this application. So we're at a point now where the 2014 application has been approved, and all of the conditions associated with that have been discharged following the discharge of condition 12 earlier today. Now, the report makes clear, this current report for the full application makes clear that 2014 application does not secure any community access whatsoever. So that applicants would be within their rights, if they wanted to implement that permission without providing any community access. My firm belief is that rather than this matter rolling forward again, that we need to encourage the developer to implement this consent, and we need to secure a community access agreement as quickly and as efficiently as possible, with the comfort that planning officers are aware of what the third-party representations are, and in accordance with the solicitor advice that we received. I say this, Chair, because the situation, I think, is tenuous if we delay the determination of this application on this basis any further.
Councillor Smart.
That's what I'll come back. So, firstly, the small point of access to Studio 8, as I see it, you go up a lift, you go along a corridor, and there are 3 steps to the door. Second point, I think, is I understood that we were deferring this item anyway.
That's not understand. We're not deferring this item, we're deferring a previous item, which is the one about the roof plant. We haven't made a decision on deferring anything in this application. Councillor Blanco.
Yeah, sorry, the reason why I say it would be logical to defer this application, Chair, is clearly the roof plant for this application is exactly the same as we've just deferred. For the reasons we deferred it, so it would look a bit odd if we then approved it on the back of this application. We could rehearse the same discussion, but that seems a bit pointless. I understand what I think Mr Williams is saying about the community access agreement, and if that was the only reason why we were suggesting a deferral, then we would have to think long and hard about whether that was the right approach. But seeing as there are, I think, legitimate grounds to defer on the basis of our own discomfort with the roof plant situation, then I think it would be appropriate to mention within the deferral we would like a worked up community access agreement to come back at the same time as the proposed treatment of the roof plant. That would seem sensible. But it is essentially the roof plant is still the issue that we are, I think, logically going to defer it, I would hope.
Councillor Blanco, earlier you mentioned that you would, at the end of your remarks, move the deferral. Is that your intention?
I will formally move the deferral, Chair.
Have you a seconder? You've 2 seconders. Before we determine this thing, we'll come back to our case officers.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start and then Toby on the right, or sadly to say anything else, I'm sure they will. Really, I just wanted to support the comments that Toby's just made in terms of making a decision on this application. He's absolutely right. In terms of deferral, obviously it would be unreasonable for the committee not to defer this application for the same reasons they deferred the other one. That would be illogical. However, in terms of a deferral for any other reason, we need specific instruction from the committee about what we're going away to do. I would say if the deferral is for consultation with the public, those sorts of things, that's going to take a lot longer than dealing with something that should be reasonably straightforward in terms of the plant screen issue. I think what the advice you've given by Mr. Williams is that we really should try and come to a conclusion with this application, and bringing it back in terms of deferral to allow public consultation wouldn't be something we would recommend to the committee.
I think we are faced with a difficult decision. The proposal is to defer this application. We have been cautioned that in doing that, the developer could fall back onto the now fully discharged 24 permission, which would preclude community access. The officers are saying that if we don't determine this today and choose to defer it, they need very specific guidance on the matters which they have to further inform us on. I would suggest to you that the principal matter, apart from the roof plant, which we previously dealt with, is the question of access, community access, to whom, for hours, at what cost, and so on, much, much more specific than that. There seemed to be a question too about the educational uses to which the building can be put, and that also needed clarification. As I understand it, those are the substantial reasons for wanting clarification and for justifying deferral. I would underline what the case officer has just told us, which is that if these matters are to be the subject of further public consultation, the delay will be much longer. I believe, from the way that local councillors have spoken this morning, that they will be fully cognizant of local opinion on the revised community access statement, and that we can rely on them to give a fair account of the community's reaction. So I wouldn't argue for going out to formal consultation on that document. So, unless you feel that any advice which I have now given is wrong, I think we will proceed to a vote, and the vote is to defer with the expectation of further guidance on the community access agreement, the roof plant previously decided. Are you happy about the clarification of educational uses?
And we can provide that now, Chair, but it would be any educational provider would be able to occupy this building. Those are the terms on which the applicant has sought planning permission. So it could be, for example, Anglia Ruskin University that could occupy this building if it were granted under the terms recommended in this report.
But is there any way in which things could be tied down so that those extended uses could be precluded?
Chair, we have had this discussion with the applicant. They are not willing to change or alter the condition 7, which defines the nature of the uses being sought. So what is before you is what the applicants want, and that must be what members must vote upon.
Well, in that case, I don't think we need any further guidance on that. It is clear that we expose ourselves, if you like, to the possibility of this extended D1 use. So that the matter on which I think residually requires attention is the access by the community. I can't see the Councillor Blencowe.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. When I sit on this committee, I speak as a member of the planning committee, and that's the hat you're wearing on this committee. Yes, you have a ward responsibility, but you're looking at it from the planning perspective. personally, and I don't know if others share this view, but I would, as a planning committee member, want to see this community access agreement in front of me so I can actually look at it and read it and see what it says. That's my right, I think, as a committee member, and that's the point I'm making. If, in an ideal world, time is such that others can be consulted, fine, but actually, as a committee member, I need to see that.
Well, I don't think my remarks precluded that, because of course you will make your judgment. I was talking to about the 2 ward councillors who presented their remarks, I thought, very forcefully and eloquently today, and I felt they could be relied upon to be in touch with their community and represent the views of the community to us. So I think that was an unnecessary intervention. Are there any further remarks before we go to the vote? Right. Of course there are. The councillor smart.
So I'd just like to say, obviously it's been a very unusual set of meetings this morning, items this morning, being linked as they are. And I don't feel we've had we've been told that we were going to have a full discussion on this item, but because of the nature of the beast, in that we are going to defer it, I just want to be reassured that when it does come back to this committee, we will have a full discussion on this item.
You bet we will, yes. I don't think there's any possibility we wouldn't have a full discussion, given the members of this committee and the members of the public who are keenly interested in the outcome of this matter. You can be assured that when it comes back, we will have another 4-hour discussion at least of this item. I think, therefore, we'll now proceed to the vote on whether to defer, awaiting a fully worked up community access agreement and the information we require on the roof plant screening before those decisions are made. So can you now vote, please, on the question of defer? Those in favour of deferring the determination of this application, please indicate. We'll wait and see.
6.
Those against? Abstain. Well, that ends the major applications for this morning. Thank you all very much.